June 22, 1944, 6:47 a.m., Saipan. Corporal Jack McKeever crouched behind his Browning M2 heavy machine gun on a coral ridge, watching enemy snipers move through tree cover 1,600 yards away, a distance his fellow Marines believed was completely safe from American small arms fire. At 26 years old, he was an Iowa farm boy turned heavy weapons specialist with 0 confirmed long-range kills, facing an enemy that had 11 sniper teams hidden throughout the volcanic ridges. Snipers who'd taken 19 Marine lives in just the past 48 hours from positions they thought were untouchable. His commanding officer had positioned the 84-pound M2 for area suppression. The other platoon leaders assumed it would spray bursts at distant tree lines like every other machine gun in the Pacific. When McKeever had first trained on the Browning back at Camp Pendleton, the instructor told him it was designed to stop trucks and planes, not pick off individual soldiers hiding in jungle canopy. The manual said effective range was 1,800 yards for vehicles, but everyone knew machine guns were for laying down covering fire in wide arcs, not precise shooting. The enemy snipers moved with casual arrogance, standing briefly in cave mouths, shifting between trees, even lighting cigarettes in broad daylight. Every military manual in the world said machine guns couldn't hit individual targets at that distance. Then McKeever did something no one expected. He stopped firing in bursts and started aiming like a rifleman. This is the story of how one Marine proved that physics doesn't care about doctrine. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to discover how he changed warfare forever. The problem nobody could solve. The morning heat on Saipan felt like breathing through wet canvas. Corporal Jack McKeever wiped sweat from his eyes as he adjusted the traverse mechanism on his Browning M2. The machine gun sat mounted on its M3 tripod behind a wall of sandbags and coral chunks, its barrel pointed toward the ridgeline 1,600 yards to the northwest where Japanese snipers had been picking off Marines for 3 days straight. McKeever had been manning this position since dawn, watching muzzle flashes wink from cave mouths and tree branches on the distant slope. He knew his crew was supposed to spray suppressive fire across the entire hillside whenever the enemy opened up. That was doctrine. That was what machine gunners did in the Pacific. Lay down sheets of lead to keep enemy heads down while riflemen maneuvered. But McKeever had been studying those flashes through his field glasses, and he was starting to think doctrine might be wrong. Sergeant Thomas Harding crawled up beside the gun emplacement, dragging a fresh belt of .50 caliber ammunition. "Still quiet over there. Think they're sleeping in?" McKeever kept his eye pressed to the optical sight they jury-rigged to the gun's receiver. Nothing fancy. A 4-power scope salvaged from a damaged sniper rifle. They're moving. Third cave from the left about 10 minutes ago. Saw someone with a rifle. 1,600 yards, Harding said, consulting the range card he'd sketched on cardboard. Might as well be on the moon. The conventional wisdom said it was impossible. McKeever was about to prove them all wrong. Subscribe to War Chronicle X. The calculations nobody believed. The conventional wisdom said machine guns were area weapons. You pointed them at a general location and pulled the trigger until the barrel glowed red, hoping to suppress whatever was out there. The M2's manual listed its maximum effective range against point targets as 1,800 yards, but that was theoretical. Nobody actually tried to hit individual soldiers at that distance with a machine gun. Rifles were for precision. Machine guns were for volume. But McKeever had grown up hunting deer on his father's farm in Iowa, and he understood something about ballistics that the training manuals didn't emphasize. The .50 caliber BMG cartridge left the barrel at 2,900 feet per second, faster than any rifle bullet he'd ever fired. At 1,600 yards, it would drop about 8 feet and take roughly 1.75 seconds to reach the target. He'd done the calculations on the back of a cigarette pack, working out wind drift and bullet drop the same way he'd calculated shots on whitetails back home. The difference was whitetails didn't shoot back. A movement caught his attention through the scope. A Japanese soldier had emerged from the third cave carrying what looked like an Arisaka rifle with a telescopic sight. The man moved casually, apparently confident that American small arms couldn't reach him across the valley. He settled into a firing position behind a fallen log, his rifle pointing down toward the marine perimeter. McCaver felt his pulse quicken. This was the sniper who'd killed Corporal Rodriguez 2 days ago and Private Johnson yesterday morning. The same patient, methodical shooter who appeared at irregular intervals, fired 1 or 2 carefully aimed rounds, then vanished back into the caves. "Tom," McCaver said quietly, "load me a belt with 1 tracer every 5th round." Harding looked puzzled. "We doing suppressive fire?" "No, I'm going to try something." What happened next would change how Marines fought for the rest of the war. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to see what he discovered. The shot that changed everything. McCaver adjusted the gun's elevation, cranking the mechanism to account for the bullet drop he'd calculated. He set the traverse stops to limit his swing, creating a stable firing platform. The M2 weighed 84 pounds without the tripod, and the entire system was designed to absorb recoil from sustained automatic fire. But McCaver wasn't planning to fire automatically. Through the scope, he could see the Japanese sniper adjusting his own rifle, preparing to engage targets in the Marine lines. The enemy soldier moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed himself completely safe. 1,600 yards was beyond the USMC effective range of American rifles. It was beyond the range of most light machine guns. The Japanese manual probably said the same thing their manual said. Machine guns were area weapons, not precision instruments. McCaver centered the crosshairs on the enemy sniper's chest, accounting for the wind drifting smoke from the morning cooking fires toward the east. He took a deep breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The M2 fired once, a single sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Through the scope, McCaver watched the tracer round arc through the humid air, its red streak cutting across the green jungle canopy. The bullet struck the fallen log 6 inches to the left of the Japanese sniper, sending up a shower of splintered wood. The enemy soldier froze, clearly stunned that a bullet had just passed close enough to feel the shock wave. He looked around frantically, apparently unable to comprehend how American fire had reached him at this distance. After several seconds of confusion, he scrambled backward into the cave mouth, abandoning his rifle position entirely. Harding stared at McCaver with something approaching amazement. "Jesus, Mac, you almost got him." "Almost," McCaver agreed. But he was already making mental adjustments. The shot had been close enough to prove the concept. The M2 could reach targets at ranges where the enemy felt safe. It was simply a matter of treating the machine gun like an enormous rifle instead of a traditional area weapon. Word of the shot spread through the Marine positions within an hour. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to discover what happened next. The skeptics and the believers' word of the shot spread through the Marine positions within an hour. Lieutenant Phillips crawled over from the adjacent platoon to see what his heavy weapons team was doing, bringing with him binoculars and a skeptical expression. "I heard you boys are trying to snipe with a .50 cal. Just testing the idea, sir." McKeever replied. "Seems like it might work." Phillips studied the distant ridgeline through his binoculars. The Japanese positions that had been active all morning were now silent, their occupants apparently rattled by the realization that their sanctuary wasn't as secure as they'd believed. "Range? 600 yards, sir. Maybe a bit more to the far caves." Phillips lowered his binoculars and looked at the M2 with new interest. Machine guns weren't supposed to work this way. They were suppression weapons designed to force enemy troops to keep their heads down while friendly infantry maneuvered. But if a machine gun could actually hit individual targets at extended range, if it could turn enemy safe zones into killing fields, then the entire tactical equation might change. As the sun climbed higher and the morning heat became oppressive, the Japanese ridge remained quiet. No muzzle flashes, no casual movement between positions. The enemy snipers who'd terrorized the Marine Battalion for days had gone to ground, suddenly aware that 1,600 yards wasn't the protective barrier they'd assumed. That evening, as McKeever cleaned the M2's barrel and Harding updated their range cards with more precise calculations, both men understood that something fundamental had shifted. They hadn't simply fired a machine gun at long range. They'd redefined what a machine gun could do. By the third day, McKeever had transformed his position into something unprecedented. Subscribe to War Chronicles, precision over volume. By the third day, McKeever had transformed his machine gun emplacement into something resembling a sniper's nest, more than a traditional heavy weapons position. He and Harding had constructed range cards for every visible landmark on the Japanese ridgeline, marking distances in 100-yard increments from 1-200 out to 800 yards. They'd reposition the M2 on its M3 tripod to provide maximum stability, using sandbags and coral chunks to create a solid firing platform that eliminated any tremor or movement that might throw off their aim at extreme range. The ballistics were challenging but manageable. The .50 caliber BMG round maintained a muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second, but at 1,600 yards, the bullet would drop approximately 8 feet below the line of sight and drift several feet laterally in even a modest crosswind. McKeever had worked out the calculations using time of flight, 1.7 seconds to target, and wind deflection tables that Harding had copied from a field artillery manual. They mixed their ammunition belts with one tracer round every fourth cartridge, allowing McKeever to observe his shots and make rapid corrections. The Japanese had initially responded to the long-range fire by simply moving deeper into their cave positions, apparently believing the accurate shooting was either luck or the work of a hidden sniper team. But as McKeever continued to engage individual targets at distances that should have been impossible for machine gun fire, the enemy began to realize they were facing something unprecedented. Their movement patterns changed dramatically. Soldiers who'd previously moved casually between positions now sprinted in short, panicked bursts. Observation posts that had been manned continuously were suddenly abandoned for hours at a time. The psychological impact was devastating. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to see what McKeever did next. The perfect shot. On the morning of June 26th, McKeever achieved what he later described as his most satisfying engagement of the campaign. A Japanese machine gun team had set up a Type 99 light machine gun behind a rocky outcrop at approximately 1,500 yards, thinking themselves well beyond the reach of American small arms. The position commanded excellent fields of fire down into the Marine assembly areas, and the enemy gunners had been harassing supply parties and communication runs all week. McKeever spent 20 minutes studying the target through his scope, waiting for the Japanese crew to become careless enough to expose themselves. The machine gun was positioned behind natural cover, but the gunner had to lean slightly to the left to aim down the slope toward American positions. It was a small target, perhaps 18 inches of exposed torso, but it was predictable. When the Japanese gunner leaned into his firing position, McKeever was ready. He'd already adjusted for range and wind, and his crosshairs were centered on the exact spot where the enemy soldier's body would appear. The .50 caliber round struck the Japanese gunner in the upper chest, the massive bullet's kinetic energy sufficient to kill instantly at that range. The enemy machine gun position went silent immediately and remained so for the rest of the day. The engagement was witnessed by an entire rifle platoon that had been pinned down by the Japanese machine gun. Word of the shot spread throughout the battalion within hours. Marines who'd been skeptical of the long-range machine gun concept became believers. Requests began coming in from other units for similar fire support, and several heavy weapons crews started experimenting with precision shooting techniques using their own M2 positions. But success brought new challenges and deadly enemies. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to discover the threat McKeever never saw coming. The enemy strikes back. The Japanese response came on July 2nd in the form of coordinated counter-sniper fire that forced McKeever to completely rethink his tactical approach. At 6:30 a.m., as he settled behind his M2 to begin the day's observation of enemy positions, a bullet cracked past his head and buried itself in the sandbags 2 inches from his right shoulder. The shot had come from a concealed position approximately 400 yards to the northwest, well within the effective range of a skilled marksman with a scoped Arisaka Type 99. Harding dropped flat beside the gun emplacement as a second bullet struck the coral parapet directly in front of their position. "They've got us ranged. That's not random fire." McKeever slid away from the machine gun, keeping his head below the sandbag line. The Japanese had clearly identified his position and assigned at least one sniper team to neutralize the troublesome American gun crew. It was an entirely predictable response, and one that McKeever realized he should have anticipated. By maintaining a fixed firing position for over a week, he'd given the enemy ample opportunity to study his location and plan countermeasures. The immediate problem was tactical. McKeever's crew had spent days perfecting their range cards and sight settings for this specific position. Moving the 84-pound M2 and its tripod to an alternate location would require at least an hour of setup time to reestablish accurate firing data. But staying in place meant accepting continued sniper fire that would eventually find its mark. McKeever's solution was brilliant and deadly. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to see how he turned. The tables. The decoy McKeever and Harding spent the morning constructing a decoy position 50 yards to the east of their actual firing point. Using spare sandbags, camouflage netting, and a damaged M2 barrel, they created a convincing duplicate of their machine gun emplacement, complete with a helmet positioned to simulate a gunner's head. The real M2 was relocated to a depression in the coral reef that provided natural protection from the northwest, but maintained clear fields of fire toward the primary target areas. On July 4th, the decoy position proved its worth. At approximately 10:15 hours, a Japanese sniper fired 3 rapid shots at the dummy emplacement, the bullets striking sandbags and camouflage netting with audible impacts. McKeever was able to locate the muzzle flash through his scope, a position in a cluster of boulders roughly 1,500 yards to the northwest, and returned fire with a single, carefully aimed round. The shot struck within inches of the target, sending up a spray of rock fragments that forced the enemy sniper to abandon his position. The record shot. On July 6th, McKeever achieved what would later be recorded as his longest confirmed kill of the campaign. A Japanese machine gun team had positioned a Type 99 light machine gun in a cave mouth at an estimated 1,850 yards, just at the extreme range of the M2's effective capability. The target was barely visible even through the jury-rigged telescope, appearing as little more than a shadow in the cave opening. The shot required precise calculation of bullet drop, nearly 12 feet at that range, and careful estimation of wind conditions that could drift the heavy bullet several feet laterally during its 2.1-second flight time. McKeever spent 15 minutes studying the target through his scope, waiting for the Japanese gunner to position himself consistently enough to provide a predictable aiming point. When the shot came, the .50 caliber round struck the cave wall directly beside the enemy machine gun position, the impact close enough to wound or kill the gunner through flying rock fragments. The Japanese weapon went silent immediately and remained inactive for the remainder of the day. Artillery observers confirmed through binoculars that the position had been abandoned, with equipment visible scattered around the cave entrance. By July 8th, everything changed. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to discover the crisis that nearly ended everything: the ammunition crisis. The crisis began at dawn on July 8th when the ammunition resupply failed to arrive for the second consecutive day. McKeever counted his remaining .50 caliber rounds and realized he had exactly 43 cartridges left, less than one complete belt for his M2. The landing ships that normally brought ammunition to the beach had been delayed by a coordinated kamikaze attack on the Naval Support Group, and the battalion supply officer could provide no estimate for when the next resupply would reach the island. Harding crouched beside the machine gun emplacement, studying their improvised range cards with growing concern. At our current rate, we've got maybe 6 engagements left. After that, we're down to what the riflemen can reach. The tactical implications were severe. Over the past week, the precision machine gun fire had suppressed Japanese activity across nearly 2 miles of enemy-held ridgeline. But all of that advantage would disappear once the M2 fell silent. Lieutenant Phillips arrived at the position shortly after sunrise. Intelligence says the Japanese are massing for a counterattack. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. They're moving troops through those ridges you've been watching, probably figuring out that your gun won't be shooting much longer. The enemy had clearly recognized the ammunition shortage as an opportunity to regain the initiative. McKeever made the decision to conserve his remaining ammunition for the most critical targets, abandoning the harassment fire that had been so effective in disrupting enemy operations. Each shot would have to count, not just tactically, but strategically. What McKeever did next would save the entire battalion. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to discover his final innovation. The final innovation Harding suggested a desperate expedient. What if we coordinate with the other heavy weapons crews, pool our remaining ammunition, and concentrate on the most critical targets? The idea had merit, but it represented a fundamental change in tactical approach. Instead of individual crew operations, the remaining machine gun teams would have to function as a coordinated precision fire unit. Lieutenant Phillips approved the concept immediately. By 1700 hours, 3 M2 crews had consolidated their remaining .50 caliber rounds into a single supply pool totaling 112 cartridges. The Japanese counterattack began at 9:30 p.m. with mortar fire on Marine forward positions, followed by infantry probes against the perimeter at multiple points. Enemy forces moved with unusual boldness, apparently confident that American long-range fire was no longer effective. McKeever's response was surgical. Instead of the sustained fire missions that had characterized earlier engagements, he fired single shots at the most critical targets: machine gun crews that threatened the Marine perimeter, sniper teams engaging American leadership, and observation posts directing enemy mortar fire. Each shot was planned and coordinated with the other precision crews to maximize tactical impact while conserving ammunition. By midnight, the coordinated precision fire had broken the Japanese counterattack, forcing enemy forces to withdraw to positions beyond effective range. The cost was 28 .50 caliber rounds, more than half of McKeever's allocation, but the Marine perimeter held, and the enemy offensive collapsed. Victory through innovation. The Japanese resistance collapsed on July 15th, not from a single decisive engagement, but from the gradual erosion of will that came when soldiers realized their safe positions had become death traps. McKeever watched through his scope as white flags appeared in cave mouths across the ridge complex. Small pieces of cloth tied to rifle barrels and thrust cautiously into the morning sunlight. The enemy forces that had held these positions for nearly 3 weeks were surrendering in small groups, their ammunition exhausted and their confidence shattered by weeks of precision fire that had reached them at ranges they'd believed impossible. Over the course of the campaign, McKeever's crew had fired approximately 430 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, achieving 17 confirmed kills and an estimated 25 additional casualties. The precision approach had delivered a casualty rate of nearly 10% per round fired, an effectiveness ratio that exceeded traditional machine gun employment by several orders of magnitude. But the raw numbers failed to capture the strategic impact of the innovation. The precision machine gun fire had forced an entire Japanese battalion to modify its tactical behavior, abandoning positions and restricting movement in ways that degraded their overall combat effectiveness far beyond the actual casualties inflicted. The lessons from Saipan would change the Marine Corps forever. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to discover the legacy. The legacy that changed warfare. Lieutenant Phillips submitted a detailed report on the precision machine gun techniques to battalion headquarters, recommending immediate dissemination of the tactics to other Marine units operating in the Pacific Theater. Through interpreters, several enemy soldiers described the psychological impact of precision machine gun engagement. One Japanese corporal, who'd served as a sniper throughout the campaign, admitted that he'd abandoned several excellent firing positions because of fear of the big gun that shoots one bullet. The Marines would carry these lessons forward to subsequent campaigns at Tinian, Guam, and eventually Okinawa, where precision machine gun techniques would become standard operating procedures rather than battlefield innovations. McKeever's experiment had demonstrated that tactical advantage often came not from superior equipment, but from superior understanding of existing capabilities. The innovation had changed how Marines thought about machine guns, range estimation, and the relationship between precision and firepower in modern warfare. As the sun set over the captured ridges, McKeever reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past 3 weeks. A machine gun crew trained for area suppression had become precision marksmen capable of engaging individual targets at extreme range. The core insight was simple. Weapons could perform beyond their design specifications when operators understood their true capabilities rather than accepting doctrinal limitations. Join the War Chronicle X community. If this story revealed something you never knew about World War II, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories of innovation that changed warfare. Subscribe to War Chronicle X to discover the untold histories that shaped combat, from battlefield innovations to the soldiers who refused to accept limitations. We bring you the stories that textbooks miss. Drop a comment below. What other W2 innovations do you want us to cover? Our community spans from veterans to military historians. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering that the greatest innovations often come from questioning what everyone says is impossible. Remember, the most dangerous weapon isn't always the newest. It's the one used in ways nobody expected. Subscribe to War Chronicle X now and never miss another story that changed history.